What about coming, like the last few days? I mean, I think your experience was different because you didn't have the OBR, so there was always a sort of last-minute scramble for the budget and, things being redone on the day before the budget. Whereas it's much more orderly now. There's the OBR for the reason that the OBR forecast is set, and the OBR forecast includes the measures in the budget, like increases in tax, and so what you've got to tell them days and days in advance. So my recollection is basically today. This is Thursday before the budget. Is the last day you can be really tinkering around with quite small measures in the budget. The major measures will have been fixed by Monday, the beginning of this week. And the fact that Chancellor's going to be in Washington and the Prime Minister's in Samoa doesn't really anyway lend itself to a last minute haggling between number 10 and number 11. And then really,
very different from our day. As you said, we used to have two versions of the scorecard. The scorecard has all of the budget measures on, and we've talked in the past about the rabbit, the thing which you announced to people's surprise at the very end, free bus travel for pensioners or free
winter fuel payment for pensioners,
winter fuel payments, all of those kind of things.
Those were the days when they were being introduced, not scrapped.
We would have a version of the scorecard which would exclude that one measure, the surprise, which would be basically the operational scorecard all the way through until the very, very last minute, the night before. No obligation on us to tell the Office of Budget Responsibility, and we would actually also know...
Or the Prime Minister.
Well, no, we always told the Prime Minister, of course. But we had...
anyone who can't see this on video will see that Ed has got a massive Cheshire Cat grin on his face.
I definitely always told Jeremy Hayward, who was, of course, the Prime Minister's principal private secretary, his most important civil servant, and it was... It's for Jeremy to sign. I think I would go home at about 3 a.m. on the morning of the budget and then come back in again at 7. But we could still make changes in the actual detail of what we're going to do, in those final hours.
No, well, that's not the case anymore. Although you can actually make changes and say, well, they're just not in the OBR scorecard. I did that a couple of times. It's quite hard to do it with big things. You can just say, well, these measures came too late for the OBR to assess them. But it's obviously not very tidy, and it can it's mildly embarrassing. But anyway, no, so now you've got to write the speech, get all the communication right, get the documentation right. These days you have to have your whole social media strategy. And then I always remember the night before the budget, when I was putting the finishing touches to the speech, you'd then head off to Buckingham Palace.
Right. And
I would have an audience with the Queen, as then was, and tell her what was in the budget and have a general conversation about the state of the nation. And
what kind of questions would she ask? And how do you think King Charles will be different in the way in which he approaches it compared to the Queen?
Oh, that is a very good question. Well, I mean, it has to be said, when I first was sort of ushered into the room with the Queen, I was sort of astonished. There was just me and her alone in this room for almost an hour, sitting in those two chairs. She would ask me general questions about the state of the government. I would tell her what was in the budget. I would particularly tell her about anything to do with the military when we were doing spending decisions, because she's the commander-in-chief. And I would also tell her about anything to do with betting duty and horse racing. So she was interested in those things. I mean, I'm not just... Lots of people say gushing things about the Queen, and I'm not, in that sense, a kind of gushing royalist. But I have to say, she was always on the money.
That's right.
And a kind of strange connection, even though you were sitting in this enormous palace, with kind of what sort of Middle Britain might think about things. And her sort of political antennae were brilliant. I think with Prince Charles, who I dealt with, now King Charles, he is a kind of passionate campaigner for lots of issues, and so I think he would be more interested in some of the policy detail, I imagine, in these audiences than she was. She wanted the overall sort of big picture, whereas I think he will want to know, well, what does this policy actually mean, and how's it going to affect this thing? And two,
look,
both credible.
He might be saying, Chancellor, I did write to you 12 times in the past 3 months on this particular issue I care about. Why isn't it in your budget?
Yeah, I'm not sure he does write anymore.
Sure
I think as king now, he knows.
I think that's right. That was a facetious and unwarranted comment for which I immediately withdraw. I mean, I used to love getting letters from him, but I would be very surprised if the king is looking at the Chancellor in the budget.
Anyway, I used to love it. And my private secretary would love it because he or she would be given a drink by the Queen's private secretary downstairs. In the very nice bottle of wine would be brought out from the Buckingham Palace cellar.
But then, of course, just before that, you've had the budget photo. And I think on budget day, it's just the Chancellor who comes out with the red box for that huge photo opportunity. Whereas on the other day of the year, what we used to call the pre-budget report, then it's the Chancellor with their wider ministerial teams.
No. These days, chancellors bring their wider team out, knowing full well that the only photo the newspapers are going to use is the one with. So the chancellor walks out the door. It's an enormous scrum of media, and you stand there. You hold the box up. You basically hope you're not going to drop the box or anything like that, and then after a few minutes, the rest of the ministerial team come out. And by the end of the time, I started off by being quite precious about it and saying, well, it's just me. And then by the end, it was like, no, the more the merrier, because I knew that it's such a moment. If you're a parliamentary private secretary, or if you're a ministerial aide, it's fantastic to be in that photo, even if it's not even if the only copy of it is on your mantelpiece. Anyway, we should wrap up because, of course, visually, what is going to be striking about Wednesday is it's going to be the first woman ever to deliver a budget in the long history of Britain and the long history of the office of the Chancellor Exchequer. So I think we both wish Rachel Reeves all the best for what should be a very special day for her.
It's a very special day for her, and as you say, a very special day for the Treasury and for the country. And we'll be back to mark that special occasion with a first reaction in the hours after she's delivered that budget next Wednesday. Looking forward to that.